Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. Note to everyone who was listening, as Bill picked up on, I need you all to remind me this time next year, or not this time next year. This time next year will be too late. This time a day ago next year, where are we? Whatever. That we come up on one of the big numerology dates, I guess. At that point, it'll be 3/23/23, and that'll be real exciting. So I will no doubt forget about that. The tweet from Bill this morning reminds me to remind you to remind me next year. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. A quick reminder for me that 1 year from today, here it is. I think I should have been asking you to remind me. I asked Bill to remind me to remind myself next year, right? 1 year from today, it'll be 3/23/23. I wanted to be the first to say it so I could build up brownie points and maybe get a juice box as a reward. Yeah, we can work on that. That'll be, let's see. Do you like the boxes or do you like the Capri Sun pouches? I still think those are cool. All right, well, it's your choice. And, wow, lots going on today. For instance, I think we should all, first of all, just pause before we go on with the show, and I guess we should ask Leanna Wen whether or not we should do the show today. She seems to be kind of manning the gate on this one. I really never really have gotten this, where she and other of the, I don't know, like the public intellectuals behind whatever. I mean, at least she's actually a doctor as opposed to people who are just polling experts and say, I don't know, for some reason that makes me an epidemiologist too. She's on a kick and has been for a couple of months about, when are we going to stop all this masking stuff? And, I mean, there's some science behind it. The idea being, well, if we're all vaccinated and boosted, or if you're vaccinated and boosted, you can be pretty sure that at the very least, even if you do pick up the coronavirus somewhere along the line, it won't be very severe illness. And when are we all going to stop hiding from this thing? And I don't know. I guess I still don't understand the question. Like, what are you doing is the question that I would ask her, and why do you think other people are are preventing you from doing it? If you are doing it, then no one is preventing you from doing it. Why did she start out with this morning, or last night, I guess? For all those who don't agree that the vaccinated can return to pre-pandemic normal, I ask, what should we all do? Perpetual masking, like that sort of. Imagining that this is a very dramatic question. Forever not dining out, avoiding large weddings and indoor gatherings, etc., blah, blah, blah. It's just nonsense. I don't know. When somebody else, another doctor, answers, how about we continue until we have adequate filtration and ventilation and indoor air and stuff like that? And again, the answer comes back, well, are you always going to do it? With due respect, why stop at requiring masking? Why not reduce, if your goal is to reduce COVID-19 to as low as possible, why not stop indoor dining, travel, and social gatherings, etc., until all your requirements are met? And the answer is because people don't want to, or not enough of them do anyway. And when Leanna Wen and some critical mass of the rest of society decide that they're going to stop, then that critical mass of society will stop. And until then, we have to listen to people cry about how the critical mass is not following them. And I understand that's the persuasion game. You have to keep saying it until a number of people follow you doing it. But I just don't understand the weird hyperbolic crying about, what does that mean? We're going to be masking forever? No, we'll probably be masking for some amount of time past when you're comfortable. Is that okay, Leanna? Does society have your permission to do that? I don't know. I was tweeting about it this morning and it stuck with me. Like, I imagine being asked, so let's go to an indoor wedding, right? And the wait staff asks you, chicken or fish for your dinner? And you say, I'll have the chicken. And like, what if the waiter throws his arms up and says, what does that mean? Chicken forever? No, just now. Bring me the chicken. What's wrong with you? Tomorrow I'll have fish and it's none of your business anyway. I don't know why this is so irritating. Maybe because she's a particularly irritating person. I don't know. Maybe because I'm tired of being asked this question. And by the way, if the question is, when will we all stop? Or when will you personally say, okay, I've had enough of the masking? I have determined that I am not certain when I will have enough, but I did decide that it probably will not be the same week that I learned that Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Jen Psaki, possibly Clarence Thomas, all got COVID at the same time, and it's still out there, and maybe I should wear a mask, and then maybe they wore masks too, but maybe I'll wear one and I'll have better luck than they do because I shake hands with fewer people. It probably won't be that week. It probably also won't be that week if I learn that Worldometers is going to click over to 1 million American deaths today. That won't be the day that I say, you know what I should do? Not what I want, but what Leanna Wen wants. Because if I don't do that, I don't know what's going to happen to her. Her whole life collapses. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here. He's never told me I have to take my mask off or cried about whether or not I have. He just does his thing and tells people what he thinks, and that's it. And that's fine. I don't know.
That's the advantage of radio. I have no idea what you're wearing.
So.
And
that's right.
Don't tell me because that would be too much information.
However, the Senate Judiciary Committee might want to know. They're very into prying
we'll touch
into
on
things
that.
like that. Yes, let's. Well,
in
not
fact,
really touch it.
With
no,
that, but since you started with Leanna Wen,
let
me give you a nice tweet thread by Greg Gonzalez. Now, Greg Gonzalez, for those of you who don't know, David does, is a Yale School of Health epidemiologist and a 30-year AIDS activist. Well, got in it for years and years and years with Tony Fauci. Developed a pretty good relationship over the years.
Oh, good. Put them both in jail then.
And has been following COVID fairly closely. And so he starts a thread this morning.
Good. It's a good day.
March 23, 2022.
Yeah.
So 3/23/23 will be next year. You have a whole year to get ready.
All right,
the COVID-19 pandemic is not over, he tweets.
What? Leanna. All right.
Since mid-August, we've had 1,000+ deaths per day in the United States.
That's
a 9/11 mass death event every few days. 2 Boeing 777 passenger planes crashing every few days.
Yeah, and now we're out of planes. What are you going to do now?
In addition, well, the problem is we're not out of planes.
Oh.
In addition, the long-term sequelae of COVID-19 mean that there are thousands more who will suffer the after effects of acute infection for months and perhaps years. Now, the public health and scientific consensus is that a vaccine plus strategy is our best hope against the pandemic.
As opposed to vaccine and go for it.
Not relying on vaccines alone to beat back the virus because they simply can't do it on their own. And I hear Moderna is applying for a 6 months to 5 year emergency use authorization.
For youths.
Because they say the vaccine's just as good for kids as it is for adults, and so hopefully that'll happen. But in any case,
part of a complete breakfast eventually.
Not everybody gets vaccinated. Not everybody gets boosted. The virus, not the response to it, has been the preeminent destroyer of lives over the past 2+ years. And in the U.S., we are now embarking on a natural experiment that will simply show us that this is the case. We're lifting almost all mitigation efforts and have little funding left for much else. And that's because politicians have been pitting people against public health mitigation efforts since the beginning of the pandemic, refused to put in place the needed social and economic support to help people survive.
Yes.
And I blame predominantly Republicans for this, just like I blame them for not accepting 2020 as a loss for them, just as I blame them for that crap show yesterday.
Yes.
Which was also called hearings. But we'll get to them one by one. Politicians have been pitting people against public health mitigation efforts since the beginning of the pandemic, refused to put in place the needed social and economic support to help people survive. And the latest development in our collective folly is that there are prominent individuals.
I know one. I know of one.
Who would likely identify as centrist liberal or just Democrats who want to pretend the pandemic is over. People like Dave Leonhardt at the New York Times or Leanna Wen.
Oh, yeah.
Who suggest if you're vaxxed, you're done, and no other mitigation efforts are necessary. In fact, they do more harm than good. Both are wrong on the facts. SARS-CoV is a communicable disease. If you catch it, even if your own risk of hospitalization or death is low, it's not negligible. You can develop long COVID. You could spread the virus to others at higher risk. I mean, those are basic facts. Both suggest that the modest mitigation efforts that were in place for the past few months are overkill. do more harm than good. But let's be clear. Venue closures are largely a thing of the past. Most states didn't have mask mandates, even during the winter. Vaccine mandates have been shot down by courts. These COVID minimizers suggest what's left is for the immunocompromised and vulnerable to protect themselves. Many of us are suggesting we are not out of the woods, not by a long shot, not by a vaccine shot.
Right.
Contrary to what Wen and Linhart are saying, which is mischaracterization, most of us are coming from a harm reduction perspective in terms of disease control, with least onerous efforts introduced first. This also means dialing up, dialing down, given local circumstances. It doesn't mean masks forever, no large gatherings or any such nonsense. It does mean you protect others to the best of your ability always. It means during lulls and good weather, where we can be outside, we can use masking, rapid testing with more discretion. When cases are high or surges on the horizon, and we may be getting there, or you're among the unvaccinated or among those at high risk of disease, you give up your game. Why? Because the goal isn't to get COVID to zero, but simply common sense and compassion. That's why. And focus your anger on politicians who've never instituted the basics we need to help us through this. That's like ventilation in schools instead of deep cleaning. Paid sick leave, long-term income support, eviction moratoria, loan forgiveness. Larry Levitt, expert on public health and health insurance, has pointed out that because the feds didn't get the money they needed, support and subsidy for paying for vaccines is going to disappear, which is going to make income inequities even greater.
Right, as we all have to pay for
the vaccine isn't going to be so free anymore. Tests aren't going to be so free anymore and so available. And that's going to hurt. So, in addition, federal programs to upgrade ventilation were never offered. Scale up and distribution of N95s and rapid tests were not done. Door-to-door booster campaigns were not done. The COVID-19 normalizers have had a string of policy victories lately. Many of us will pay with our lives.
My life.
Now they want the moral high ground by trying to tell the rest of us we're not realistic, we're not nuanced. Realize you're not alone. For urgency of equity. To journalists like Ed Young and others, Catherine Wu, there are others who have decided to bear witness to fight.
And good.
Ed Young had a wonderful piece about that just the other day.
Yeah? Did we read it?
How did this many deaths become normal?
Here it is. Oh, okay. Yes, right. No, I don't think we did read it.
I don't think we did.
So. One of many terrific things we couldn't get to that day.
Right.
All right.
The U.S. is nearing 1 million recorded COVID-19 deaths without the social reckoning that such a tragedy should provoke. Why? I had it in the pundit write-up, but not on the show.
Yes.
And many aspects of the pandemic work against the social reckoning, he writes. The threat of virus is invisible. The damage it inflicts is hidden from public view. With no lapping floodwaters or smoking buildings, the tragedy becomes contestable to a degree that a natural disaster or terrorist that cannot be. And I would add, it doesn't make for compelling graphics on TV. A talking head or a lady who says, I don't feel good, isn't the same thing as a tornado destruction or a Mariupol destruction. And so it doesn't lead. If it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
Meanwhile, many of those who witness COVID's ruin are in no position to talk about it. Healthcare workers are still reeling from death on a scale I've never seen before. The bereaved face guilt on top of sadness. I think about the way it would run through families and tight-knit groups and the huge psychological toll as people think, am I the one who brought it in? Whitney Robinson, a social epidemiologist at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, told me. And though 3% of Americans have lost a close family member, that means 97% have not.
Yes.
The 2 years that were shaved off the average lifespan undid 2 decades of progress in health, but in 2000 didn't feel like we were living under a horrible mortality regime. It felt normal. So if you think that 2000 is okay, you're going to think now's okay.
Yeah, I guess.
So to grapple with the aftermath, there has to be an aftermath, but the coronavirus pandemic is still ongoing and feels so big we can't put our arms around it anymore. It's like staring into the sun after 2 years. It's no wonder people are looking away.
Oh, right. You're not supposed to do that.
Excess deaths feel less excessive. Levels of suffering that once felt like thunderclaps now resemble a metronome click, background noise.
right?
In 1920, the U.S. was hit by a fourth wave of the Great Flu pandemic that had begun 2 years earlier. But even as people died in huge numbers, virtually no city responded, wrote John Barry, historian of the 1918 flu.
Oh.
People were weary of influenza, and so were public officials. Newspapers were filled with frightening news about the virus, and no one cared.
All right, well, at least we know we're the same as we were then.
Right,
That's
people are
good
people.
to know. Yeah, well, okay. So, in other words, I guess you would say that this was predictable.
Right. Richard Keller,
Unless you
a
thought we were
medical
involved.
historian at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, says much of the current pandemic rhetoric, premature talk, endemicity, it's endemic, the focus on comorbidity. He didn't die
All right.
from COVID. He died
In the same country as COVID.
admiring COVID. Right. I don't know what they're saying.
Right.
The from COVID or with COVID debate treats COVID deaths as dismissible and inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Like gun violence, overdose, extreme heat death, heart disease, and smoking, COVID becomes increasingly associated with behavioral choice and individual responsibility, therefore increasingly invisible, and by the way, therefore not the responsibility of politicians and you and me, and why are we voting on it?
Okay.
You don't vote on time.
Ah.
What time is it? Well, you don't vote on that. It is.
No.
Well, actually, you do, because daylight savings time is going to be provided.
We have voted.
We don't honor
Yes.
deaths that we ascribe to individual failing, which could explain why national moments of mourning have been scarce.
Yes.
No one knows how many people will die from COVID in the coming years. The number will depend on our collective behavior, how many more people can be vaccinated and boosted, and why there isn't a bigger vaccination boosting push. Part of the reason is politicians refuse to allocate more money for it.
Yeah. We haven't asked them the second time since we told them that they technically screwed it up, but we should.
Right.
Please try again.
Pelosi said you screwed it up, but I haven't seen anything that basically fixes the issue.
That's
So,
true.
that's the Leanna Wen thing. You're quite right to point it out. There's a lot going on here, and the dismissive people are basically saying, I have an upper middle class lifestyle, and I'm sick and tired of getting it, upended.
But it had.
My kids need their tennis lessons.
And they're having them. I bet you anything. I don't understand. Like this.
Yeah, well, you tried to
who
make me
pays
feel
for
guilty
this?
about it, so I'm going to write a column.
I guess so. Or maybe they're doing it as a volunteer basis. I do a lot of that, who pays you for this? Nobody, right? So you're still here.
Yeah,
So,
well,
all right. It doesn't have to be that I don't mean that they're being paid off. I'm just sort of like, well, what's your job? How is it that you're doing it if you're, stuck in your house? You're not?
So here's
Oh,
here's
okay.
a sideline from that, which is, of course, an interest of mine for decades. Tim Rickworth, writing in Slate, we're expecting the wrong things from CDC.
Oh.
If you want the CDC to be apolitical, you're missing the point of
Right.
public health.
Oh.
Why is this relevant? Well, a lot of criticism about what CDC is or isn't doing. But, the fact is, 15 years ago, I told Mike Levitt, Secretary HHS, like in a pretty much personal meeting in his office, that, the problem with public health is that it doesn't have a political constituency, and so there's no support for it. And you got to fix that. You're a politician. You're a governor. You should know this. And, if there is no political constituency, then every time you need the public to back you, they're not going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And 15 years later, still a problem. America's favorite pandemic punching pan, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, is making many people angry once again. 3 weeks ago, the agency defined away high transmission areas and walked back its recommendation to wear masks in essential indoor spaces like schools and grocery stores. We want to give people a break, said the agency's director, Rochelle Walensky. The scarlet letter of this pandemic is the mask. It reminds us we're in the middle of a pandemic. Now, for some, the CDC shift is a welcome acknowledgement of a new reality where many are protected by vaccine or infection-induced immunity. For others, the CDC is acting prematurely, putting politics over public health and setting the stage for another surge. In the wake of the recent shifts in guidelines, many are lamenting the politicization of the CDC. Favorite accusation of pundits, politicians, public health officials. Reestablishing the firewall between politics and science must begin immediately, wrote 4 former CDC directors in an opinion piece last year.
Oh.
Okay, and I'll tell you more about this article, but I'm telling you right now, those 4 former CDC directors are wrong, and they've always been wrong.
Aha.
right? CDC needs to be more political, not less political.
Ooh.
It's the only way you develop a political constituency, not in the way that Putin does politics. I only want to hear good news for me. That's what Trump did when he had his people at CDC.
Okay.
But CDC has to be a lot more aware of what's going on in the public and can't live in an ivory tower.
Yeah, all right.
Now, we'll take 90 months to come to some conclusion where we're going to make a small change after it goes through 97 different committees. That doesn't work in the real world.
No.
To an extent, these critics have a point. No one is in favor of the big P politics, he writes, of the Trump administration's ham-handed political interference, of the Biden administration's subtler but pernicious tendency to suppress evidence that undermines preferred policies. And during the profound and destabilizing crises of the past 2 years, many of us have yearned for an impartial authority, a font of scientific wisdom that will offer salvation in trying times. In the popular imagination, CDC was supposed to be that scientific authority. And now a sense of disillusionment about the agency has set in, but the cries of politicization miss an important point about what kind of institution the CDC can ever be. No public health decision is purely scientific, so the agency can't avoid the small p politics of health policy. You know, that's like looking at the affordable health care and saying, well, it should all be about medicine. Politics shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Well, yeah.
Well, you know, here's the thing.
How do you do that?
There's this concept called trade-offs. That's really what he's getting to here.
Oh.
All public health policy is about trade-offs. And you can't have everything. And people need to be told you can't have everything. We're doing this because we can't afford to do this and that, and this makes more sense than that. You can't have both. And let me tell you, government people are incredibly reluctant to say that to you. You can't have less taxes and more services. You can't. Well, I'm running on less taxes and more services. What are you going to do when you get there? I'm going to change the subject and talk about CRT.
Oh, yeah. What do you mean I can't promise that? I just did.
Right.
Oh.
No matter what we may yearn for, there is no ethereal scientific plane the CDC can ascend to. The politicization accusation implies we should just isolate the CDC and let it do its work by itself, said Gil Ayala, a sociology professor at Columbia University. And here's the thing, right? There's plenty of epidemiologists at CDC who used to be former directors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You need more anthropologists and sociologists there.
Oh.
So that they could talk a little bit about what this means to the public and how is the public likely to react to it. They don't have that. That's what they need.
Well, it's a good
but
job
I think that's
for
wrong. I don't think we know of an obvious way to organize the relationship between science and politics. That is, they're always intertwined, especially when it comes to the work of a large government agency. And this realization may seem like cause for deeper disillusionment, and that depending on your priors, maybe that'll be the result, but it also holds an opportunity for hope. The goal shouldn't be to depoliticize the CDC, but to have an honest discussion about what small p politics it should champion. Right? You think we're being political when we say that we want to decrease inequality? Well, let's just be upfront about it. We're trying to decrease health inequality. That's what we're doing. You think that's politics? Fine. I accept the label. That's what we're doing.
All right. I'm there.
Thinking about how to politicize the CDC, what values it should hold, and how it should act on them is exactly how people in power can better equip the agency for the next public health crisis.
Well, I'll agree.
The tension between the science and politics of public health is as old as the field itself. As medical historian Dan Goldberg of the University of Colorado conceptualizes it, there have long been competing narrow and broad views of public health's mandate. I'll give you one quick example. You know, I remember back in my training, we looked at, and I trained at that Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, which served parts of the South Bronx, which by zip code had the highest asthma levels in the United States by some counts.
I didn't know that's what zip codes were for, but okay.
Well, you know, if you do it by zip code, you get a sense of where are the problems, and so where could you put your resources?
Right.
So we serve that area.
Okay.
Right? And how do you fix asthma? Well, you have to diagnose it. You should, prescribe the proper medicines. You should work with families to make sure they can afford the medicine, so on and so forth. Traditional medicine, traditional pediatrics.
That's the answer.
That's the narrow view.
That and postal service.
That's the narrow view. The broad view is if you live in roach-infested housing, and roaches are part of the reasons why you have allergies against roach, and that's one of the reasons your asthma is that bad, and or it has to do with demographics of who lives in the area, then if you really want to address asthma, you're going to have to address housing. And that's the broad view of public health.
Yes. Okay. That makes some sense, right? And have to be advocating about housing, and people will say, "Stay in your lane."
Right.
Give
And you should
kids
also,
lollipops.
have visiting nurses to the home, and you should do a bunch of other things. But then you figure out that, hey, these families are having trouble putting food on the table, let alone buying expensive asthma medicines. Well, now you're getting into the political stuff. Well, it's all public health. All you're trying to do is help their asthma.
Yeah. Well, why not?
That's
All
just
right.
one small example in a whole big tapestry.
It's an
And
excellent
so the
example.
idea
We all
that
get
you
it.
could have this really narrow view and somehow get away with it, it gets back to the whole thing about what's public health all about. So this debate inevitably takes on political or even moral overtones, the article says. In the late 1990s, some academic epidemiologists were lamenting their field has become obsessed with molecular mechanisms. For many epidemiologists, the study of social factors is considered too political. Two authors lamented in 1997. It's necessary for epidemiology to affirm its connection with policy and to reject scientific isolation. Or, you could just walk into the area, don't tell anybody, and remove the pump handle.
Oh, yes. Right.
Or you can send it to committee and see what the committee wants to do.
Right.
While you hide the pump handles.
By
Nobody
the
can
way,
find it.
I was just watching something the other day where that pump handle came up, and by the way, the guy got clobbered for taking the pump handle.
Right. Some epidemiologists even accuse their peers of being blinkered by their own privilege. As one expert wrote in the American Journal of Public Health, epidemiologists tend to be most interested in risk factors they can relate to or may even be exposed to. So tobacco smoke, alcohol, diet, viruses, and some occupational chemical exposures, but they're rarely at risk of being poor, so they leave that part out.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of areas suffer from the same problem as we...
Well, epidemiologists can't be expected to solve every problem, they say. Well, neither can government, but, put your big belly pants on because that's why you're there. We'll come back after the break.
Right, and when we're back, we'll be back to why being a judge isn't only about calling balls and strikes, and you can't just stay in your lane. There's some of that, too. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Believe it or not, there are other problems in the world as much as time as... we probably could do another hour on how wrong Leanna Wen is. But I think it's...
I only did half the article. There's some great stuff in here. And so your viewers, when they look at the roundup that you publish with Scott Anderson, will make sure we have this link. It's really good.
It is. And it was widely circulated when it came out. And I think I must have looked at it and said... This is terrific. There's no way I can fit it on the radio.
Yeah, well, you're right. We can't fit it, so we'll turn to something else.
That's why.
But we're going to have some related themes here.
Yes.
And one of the related themes is politicians bloviating about what they would do when they get elected, and then having no time to actually govern, so they don't want to deal with this. But what they do have time to do with is pander to their constituency. And if you don't think that white Christian nationalism is driving the GOP, you probably missed yesterday's hearing.
Oh. Yeah, or even peripheral happenings around the hearing, but boy.
So, we talked about this on Monday and last week, and the prediction was that, of course they're going to go after abortion, and then they're going to go after Griswold, which is not Clark Griswold from National Lampoon's Vacation. It's Griswold versus Connecticut, which is the right to birth control. They're then going to go after gay marriage. And then there's Mike Braun, who says interracial marriage should be left to the states. And so basically what they're saying is that we want white Christians who run a lot of the southern states to dictate policy for the entire United States, or at the very least, we want the United States to stop interfering in local decisions,
stop
like
uniting,
ending abortion completely, and allowing interracial marriage.
That was the latest victim of their march towards back to states' rights, which we know from history is never about racism. But yes, this time Mike Braun comes out and says, no to interracial marriage if they say so.
What's her name? Marsha Blackburn.
Blackburn
from Tennessee.
Yeah.
Who hails from Mississippi. Basically started out by saying, we're not going to let any of your northeastern liberal nonsense mess with our conception of the proper way to look at the United States, which is a white Christian nation.
Oh, well,
several articles
about
this
taxes.
I think were pretty good and kind of nailed this. And so Lindsey Graham bemoaning the fact that conservatives have been treated meanly.
Yeah.
Going back to Robert Bork, and
as the founders intended.
Yeah. That was I don't have any complaints about any of your qualifications, but I'm telling you, you guys were mean to conservatives, and so I'm not letting this drop.
Yes, I thought that the
what's that got to do with what you're supposed to be doing here?
I don't know. I thought it was an interesting thing that they were so finally sort of transitioning off of the Bork grievance, and all they did was convert it into Kavanaugh grievance, but.
Because they need something that they recognize that most people don't even know who Robert Bork is anymore.
Yeah, I think.
And by the way, if you talk to people who knew him,
he
was just a mean, nasty old guy who really shouldn't have been on the Supreme Court. But Philip Bump kind of sums it up fairly well here in his piece. GOP drops any subtlety in centering the Jackson nomination fight on race.
Okay.
Right? Part of the issue, of course, is the historic nature of Jackson's nomination. If confirmed, she would be the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Before she was nominated by Biden, Republicans expended a great deal of energy performatively lamenting the president had pledged to nominate a black woman, a pledge cast by many on the right not as a recognition of historic oversight, but instead as representing some sort of un-American form of affirmative action. If you believe that the United States should be run by white male Christians, then of course,
that's going to be disturbing to you.
And so the whole theme of all of this,
Christians.
Republican Party itself decided to weigh in, elevating a point first introduced by Marsha Blackburn on Monday. It suggested in a tweet that Jackson nomination was a Trojan horse for the most nefarious of concepts, critical race theory. That was the GOP itself. The GOP.
Right.
The committee, the formal party.
Right. This is the sort of thing they used to contract out to other hitmen.
Right.
But now
when considering the specific criticisms the party's offering, it's important to remember the definition of CRT often used in political discussions is subjective. It's been intentionally used to describe a wide range of race-related programs and ideas. So CRT should generally just be understood to mean a race-related concept or idea that the right dislikes, and not anything specific or any significant scale. But here, the Republican National Committee tries to tie its attack to something specific. Jackson in one lecture mentioned her parents had a book written by a proponent of the theory on their coffee table.
Yes.
In another lecture, she mentioned critical race theory as one of a half dozen aspects of law and legal theory that come into play in sentencing. And that's it. Yep. First is guilt by association. The latter, a recognition that critical race theory might inform legal decisions.
Which is what the theory is actually about, and why.
In the same portion of that lecture, Jackson also suggests people might consider contract law when it comes to sentencing, but the RNC didn't pick that outrageous. To emphasize their concerns about her being beholden to big contract.
Big K.
We know why. For decades, Republican officials and candidates slowly moved away from explicit racial appeals to quiet or subtle ones, a pattern reflected in the Southern strategy.
Yeah, Mike.
But emboldened by the increased discussion about race that accompanied Black Lives Matter, the party started moving back to the more explicit racial appeals, such as that which focus on critical race theory. Ask a Republican voter what CRT means, and they're likely to offer up some pastiche of concerns about children being taught that white people are guilty.
Right.
are bad and that the U.S. is fundamentally racist and foundationally racist. CRT has been recodified to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans, as this fellow Rufo promised, where Americans mean heavily conservative white Americans.
Yes.
So that's his column. Robin Given has a more expansive look. History unfolds with glory, insults, comfort, and patience. Right? The glory and patience are on the part of the judge, and comfort maybe too, and insults, of course, on the part of the GOP. Well-written article, and I don't mean to gloss over it, but in the interest of time, I want to get to this Thomas Zimmer piece in The Guardian because it's it's an overarching view of what's going on here.
White guy, Thomas Zimmer.
The real German white guy.
Okay.
The real and far scarier reason
Yikes.
Republicans think Biden is illegitimate, he writes in The Guardian. Many conservatives don't think the 2020 election was stolen, but they believe democracy itself has betrayed America by allowing the wrong people to take charge.
Aha.
And that issue is exactly what's going on with these hearings, and that's why I'm bringing it up. It's not specifically writing about the hearings, but it's writing about the hearings.
I like it.
And it's writing about the GOP, and it's writing about the Republican Party, and it's writing about this moment in America, and this is what's going on.
Okay.
Earlier this month, Team Trump claimed in court that their efforts to nullify Joe Biden's victory couldn't possibly have been fraudulent or be described as a criminal conspiracy because those in and around the White House had merely been acting on the basis of sincerely held suspicion.
Suspicions. Wow.
Yeah, this
They're
sparked the
ratcheting
latest
it back.
round in the never-ending debate over whether or not Republicans actually believe the election was stolen. Politically, it's important to push back against the opportunistic ways in which Republicans up and down the country have been using the big lie. But if we're trying to understand what's animating the right's rapidly accelerating radicalization against democracy, binary assumptions of Republicans as true believers or power-hungry cynics are not very helpful.
Okay.
And actually obscure more than they illuminate. In some fundamental way, they're both. What we really need to grapple with is why so many Republicans are convinced that the outcome of the election was illegitimate, regardless of whether or not there were specific procedural irregularities, which is why, by the way, the conspiracy theory thing won't die. Yes. Surveys have consistently indicated that a clear majority, probably about two-thirds of Republicans, consider Biden an illegitimate president. It's highly likely many of them are well aware that some of the specific claims emanating from the right, fake ballots, lost ballots, illegals voting, are bogus. They don't seem to care about the specifics. They just believe Biden shouldn't be president.
Right.
What's most alarming is the underlying ideology that leads so many on the right to consider Democratic victories invalid, even if they concede there's nothing technically wrong with how the election was conducted. It's become a core tenet of the Republican worldview to consider the Democratic Party as not simply a political opponent, but an enemy pursuing an un-American project of turning what's supposed to be a white Christian patriarchal nation into a land of godless multiracial pluralism. And me speaking now, not him, it's only in that context can you look at Marsha Blackburn and Lindsey Graham questioning the judge and understand what's going on here.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just like...
Otherwise, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense to me. Well, yeah, it does. You're saying that your very existence is threatening to white Christian patriarchy.
Oh.
And therefore, you shouldn't be in a position of power.
Right.
It's wrong for you to be there. And the fact that you think that we should, look like America and treat people fairly is just the evidence of I'm right.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be here.
Right. You don't look like the America I had in mind.
Right. And you're being fair to the wrong people.
Oh, man.
That's what all of this is.
That's what it feels like.
And that's why this essay is so relevant to those hearings. Conversely, Republicans see themselves as the sole proponents of real America, going back to Sarah Palin, defending the country from the forces of radical leftism, liberalism, and wokeism. And even if they don't subscribe to the more outlandish conspiracies, many Republicans agree the Democratic Party is a fundamentally illegitimate political faction. Why, they don't even use the right name. It's the Democrat Party. That's how dishonest they are.
They keep doing
any election outcome that would lead to democratic governance must be rejected as illegitimate as well. Republicans didn't start from an assessment of how 2020 went down and come away with doubts. It's the other way. They looked at the outcome and then they went and tried to figure out how this happened.
Well,
right? And it's
that's
worth
the
paying
normal
attention to how reactionary intellectuals have been dealing with 2020. We wouldn't expect Trump, most Republican officials, or the conservative base to devour right-wing treatises. As much as they would like to believe it, these reactionary thinkers aren't leading the movement. They're articulating the authoritarian spirit that's threatening an American democracy in strikingly stark terms. And this goes back to the whole, religious right movement, the Falwells, and those guys,
Okay.
basically saying this is what the Republican Party is. We are the Republican Party, and they are us, and we stand for trying to elect people at school board level on up who are seeing the world the way we see it and stop all those other people who are undeserving of being in positions of power.
That's the basics of it.
In March 2021, the magazine American Mind published a particularly instructive essay from Glenn Elmers entitled "Conservatism is No Longer Enough." American Mind is a publication of the Claremont Institute, a right-wing think tank in California. It's become home to some of the most outrightly pro-Trump intellectuals. And it's notable that Elmers makes no claim that 2020 was stolen. He doesn't allege manipulation, vote fraud, conspiracy, and explicitly acknowledges that more people voted for Biden.
Okay.
Basically, he says that's the problem.
Oh, I see.
He doesn't peddle conspiracy theories. According to Elmers, Biden's presidency represents an un-American idea of multiracial pluralism, fundamentally in conflict with authentic America. And in his view, everybody who voted for Biden in his progressive project of narcotizing the American people and turning us into a nation of slaves is un-American and therefore not worthy of inclusion in the body politic.
Narcotizing.
Elmers declares that most people living in the United States, certainly more than half, are not Americans in any meaningful sense of the term.
Well,
only authentic Americans are allowed in Glenn Elmers' United States, a racialized idea of the people most clearly represented by the vast numbers of heartland voters. So Zimmer just gets right to the point here. If you look at Claremont and the people behind Trump, this is what they're talking about here, right?
Yeah,
it's a toxic mixture of white nationalism and Christian nationalism.
And Elmer's glue is not that great, I'll add. Different one, but I mean, still. The point is you should boycott it.
ELLMER.
Yeah, I see. All right, well, yeah.
So his final point, whether or not Republicans actually believe conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, most are absolutely convinced the result was illegitimate. Take that view, then go back and look at these hearings today when you watch them, when the Republicans ask their questions, and you'll better understand where all this crap is coming from.
Well, if you didn't watch yet, now you have something. Now it's like you can go back and look for the signs of these things, and you'll understand what was going on. If yesterday you were just astonished, today you'll understand. I think you understood yesterday, though.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
So let's end this with a slightly different essay, slightly different point of view, but again, going back to the main themes here. And this, I don't know if you had a chance to do this yesterday. I didn't listen to the show. I don't always listen when I'm not on.
That's okay. I don't listen when I'm doing it.
Who's unhappy with schools? The answer surprised me.
Yes.
Did you do that essay?
I did. I should have waited for you. But it's a good one.
That's okay. It's a good one. And basically, the author says, you know what? A lot of people complaining about the schools don't really have a lot of skin in the game.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
They don't have kids in school.
They don't. They're either
too
old, like in Virginia, as we found out recently, or they've moved their kids to private school, but
they don't hesitate to tell you what you should do.
That's right.
Basically their point is not only that I don't agree with the vision that this other party has, I think that even though I'm not involved and don't have any skin in the game, I should still be telling you what to do because that's the natural order of things.
Yes. And then I realized yesterday when they're done lecturing about you, at you about that, they then go to a fundraiser with Rick Scott and say we shouldn't listen to poor people because they don't have any skin in the game, and we should either tax them, at which point then they'll say, well, we shouldn't listen to them because I don't like their skin, even though it's in the game, or what? I don't know what his excuse is going to be for not listening to them then, but. Skin in the game is a malleable concept for these guys. And
now my truly last piece is going to mention the Ukraine crisis and actually, sort of tie in everything together, which is to say the problems we're having with the United States right now have a great deal to do with the Republican Party, the people in the Republican Party, the people who vote Republican, and the people who think that, it's best for everybody if white, male, conservative Christians run everything. And anything that gets in that way is subject to fair game destruction.
Yes, or whatever kind of
You think that's a radical concept? Look at what's going on with those hearings at the Supreme Court. And listen to Thomas Zimmer. Look at what's going on in terms of voting in the GOP and their views in electing Donald Trump. None of it's made up. It's all true.
And I can listen to the show on Friday, because I was pre-recording stuff for Friday because I'm going to be off the air. And guess what? This is a huge theme. Yeah. Not with these articles either. Other stuff. Other people think this. Can you
So this one is from The Atlantic. The Ukraine crisis briefly put America's culture war in perspective. When something real happens, Americans found a way to pay attention.
Okay.
Sounds good. Okay, but when you dig into it, those first few days after Russia's invasion revealed something important about the U.S. Much of what looks like unbridgeable polarization online may be the product of boredom, distraction, and jadedness. When something real happens, people pay attention to that instead. We refresh our feeds incessantly looking for new information, sharing it, and as a shooting war started, average users sought our experts in reputable news organizations. Google Trends showed a relative increase in searches for nuclear weapons and potassium iodide, which is a treatment used after radiation emergencies.
Yeah.
With the Chernobyl thing, it's not surprising. While searches for Ukraine were at an all-time high, the culture war temporarily faded in the background, much as it did in the early days of 2020 when a new pathogen was still largely confined to China. And the vibe shift after the invasion was so profound, many Twitter users assumed the Russian trolls had suddenly been banished from American screens.
Oh, yes, right. We thought that, right?
In general, Americans have been too quick to blame Russian trolls for the degraded quality of online discourse. Residual anger about Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election had prompted many people, especially on the left, to attribute rancorous discussion to foreign agents. The story is comforting. It implies the fault somehow lies somewhere other than with our fellow citizens.
Oh, well, I still have problems with them. But
Yet my team's research at the Stanford Internet Observatory suggests that the conspiracy theorists pervading conversations about COVID and politics typically originate with Americans. They spread because enough Americans want them to. Although some foreign agitators do play on the fringe of some hashtags, they're seldom the primary drivers in the public conversation. If flooding social media with propaganda is an act of aggression, Americans are our own worst enemy. And so he goes on and points out that this is true. Again, step back and look at the bigger picture here.
All right.
Why are so many people willing to accept that ivermectin and other weird things, hydrochloroquine, bleach, you name it, are better ways to approach COVID than vaccines? And, part of the answer here, part of it at least, has to do with the fact that all of these traditional mainstream therapies and approaches, whether it's masks or vaccines, are being suggested by Democrats who are in power who are fundamentally illegitimate. And therefore, why should we listen to any of this? It's all part of the same thing. We don't have to be in the position, they think, of being told what to do by this other group of people who shouldn't be in any position to tell us what to do. And the fact that they're telling us what to do, I resent it tremendously. I'm going to look for an alternative. And that's what's driving a lot of this stuff.
Okay. That's, we used to think of it as good old-fashioned American individualism, but now, of course, it's weirdly tribal, which isn't individualism at all, for one thing, but also, I mean, you can still individually reach the conclusion that the shot will help you. I mean, the information is there.
Well, but if your driving way of looking at the world is that those others are telling me what to do, then it's going to drive everything. Your politics, your feelings about medicine, things that you wouldn't even think are politics. And that goes back to the whole thing. Well, CDC should be divorced from politics. What are you, crazy? You can't. Do
they feel that way?
You can't separate the pandemic from politics.
No.
How are you going to separate the CDC from politics?
Well, you can't, as you pointed out earlier. But I mean, I don't understand that. I mean, well, I guess I don't understand here now. I would say they hate people telling them what to do, and so therefore they are
My
clinging
people
to
are telling me to do something else. I'm going with my people.
There you go. So, like, I'm going to be I'm going to sign on with authoritarians because I hate when people tell me what to do.
Well, my
I
governor's
hate when
telling
people
me
tell
not
me
to
the
do it.
opposite of what I want.
And my pastor's telling me not to do it. And those are the people I'm going to listen to, not these, possibly left-wing, scientists.
Yeah.
And I won't even tell you what religion I think they are. They're not mine. I mean, that was a question Lindsey Graham asked yesterday at the hearings. What religion are you?
Yes.
What
although
the
he
F?
claims he was trying to make the point of, see how uncomfortable this made Amy Coney Barrett? And, I mean, the answer to that was, yes, I did see how uncomfortable it made her. I was serving on the same bench, and I felt bad for her. Well, where were you during that? I was on the bench. I can't speak about things like this. Well, where were other people who like you? How about that? Why didn't they speak up? What are you talking about? I don't know. So, in other words, Lindsey Graham pulling out the two wrongs to make a right. Good old American family values.
I mean, he really lifted whataboutism to a new level.
He did.
I've just got nothing to do with you. Let me tell you about Scalia.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, he likes lecturing about all that stuff, and then leaving because it's not a question or anything. He just says things. I don't know.
Didn't
what
have questions, and she did fine.
Yeah.
She was poised. She was balanced.
Oh
she did
boy,
great.
was she poised! Yeah, I mean, that's a discussion for the ages. Really, is the whole frozen smile thing, and why some people have to approach their hearing that way, whereas others can rage and scream and throw things and end up on the Supreme Court just as easily.
Yeah, exactly. You can cry that you like your beer,
right?
Or you can make the people who are questioning you admit, with air quotes around it, that you are articulate.
Yes, right. Thank you very much. And so they do these things, and you have to sit there and
you have to sit there and take it.
And
right? And
why
that's just the way it works.
One guy gets to cry and scream and make accusations, and the other person has to sit there and take it. By the way, there can be no critical theories about that. I don't want to hear anything about that. So don't try to tell me what I just observed and took some small measure of delight in.
Well, again, when the wrong
television.
people are being elevated to positions of power,
Yes,
our job is to, in Republicans' minds, hold them to a standard of perfection. When it's Ainsworth and Carswell and other mediocre people, as Roman Hruska put it. Mediocre people have a right to be represented too,
That is true. They have Lauren Boebert.
Right? And so, then you don't have to hold it to that kind of standard, or any kind of standard.
That's true. Well, it's a rough thing to watch, that's for sure.
It was horrible.
And
so I watched it.
Yeah. There you go.
I knew you weren't going to watch it.
Well, yeah, but it's not because it's horrible
anymore.
or not. I just don't watch things. I'm too busy watching other people excerpting from the things, and I can't watch all the clips if I'm watching the thing. Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that. So I'm just saying.
So
again, I think that the clown show, as
one, right?
Who was it? Dana Milbank put it.
Oh, yeah. Is that the No Circus one?
Yeah, something like that. They promised no circus, and then the clown show, then the clown
there
car arrived.
Okay, got it. Right. Dana doing better these
Again,
days.
I think it all goes back to a bigger, more expansive reading of what's going on here, which you should look to Thomas Zimmer to summarize very nicely. And so that's my segment for today. That's my brief 20-minute segment for today.
Yes. And we got 5 more minutes. No, all right. Well, anyway, yeah, we always stretch these things out. There's plenty. Well, if you're going to do a grand unifying theory of everything,
it takes
I don't expect you're going to be able to do it.
It takes a while to include everything.
Yeah, that's true. And the rest of the show about noting all the things that we didn't get to include yet. So, yeah, this was good. This is this dovetails nicely with what will become Friday's show. A lot of what Thomas Zimmer had to say, well, it makes sense, and other people think so too and thought so before and said it in slightly different terms. And by Friday, you'll be able to synthesize the whole thing yourself. It'll be very exciting.
I'll end with this tweet from the Reverend Jackie Lewis.
Oh.
Black woman who writes, the last thing I'll say is I'm overwhelmed by Judge Jackson's grace and dignity, but sitting through abuse shouldn't be a requirement of being black and excellent. She deserves so much more than this. And she's absolutely right.
All right. Well, that does sum it up. And good. I'm glad you had that, because as many times as I thought that yesterday, I was like, well, what does a white guy have to say this for? I'm just going to say it. And somebody else has already said this better and has a better, right to speak directly to it than I do. But I want more people saying it and acknowledging it. So, but anyway, I held my tongue and waited for everybody else to speak their piece instead. And they sure did, and they were right. It really is remarkable. And they'll do nothing to acknowledge it on the other side, which is the real tragedy in all of this, and why we need someone like her on the Supreme Court to make sure that, as embarrassing as it is to Republicans to admit that this is the way they view things, she'll be there to lay it out for them with a lifetime appointment that they can't remove her from, or we'll never allow it anyway. So, okay.
The funny thing is?
What is it?
We covered parts of the hearing yesterday.
Yes.
We didn't even get to Josh Hawley, and he was the worst of them.
Oh, right. Okay. He is the worst. Well, that's true. Although, there was a lot of foreshadowing. He made it plain early on that he was going to be the QAnon attacker in the hearings, and he, I think he delivered. I don't know how. We haven't polled the QAnon believers about whether they're happy with it or not, but yeah, he rolled out the, you're pretty much a child molester, aren't you? Basically.
I would say QAnon believers by definition are not happy, so I can answer your question.
I guess there's no way of making them happy. And those are the ultimate and won't take yes for an answer. Because their ranks are filled with child traffickers, and they still can't find the ones they're looking for. So, all right, look next to you, and then you'll have to take yes for an answer. It was abusive and horrific, and I don't know, a lot of people were willing to say so, and I don't know how much traction it's getting, but he seems intent on doing it. The ultimate.
Well, even National Review came down on him, as we said the other day.
Okay. Well, once you've lost the National Review, you know what they say. You've lost the National Review. That's the total impact of the National Review, I guess. All right. Thanks, Greg. We'll check in with you again tomorrow. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg wanted me to make sure that we came back on the air with another mention of the fact that Josh Hawley is terrible. And he is terrible. And I, as you know, I didn't watch the hearings live, certainly. And all the clips that I've watched of the hearings, I never did sit down and watch Josh Hawley do his thing. And I note that, in the moment, there was, of course, a lot of reaction to what he was doing because he was really, trolling in the worst possible way. And, in some weird and embarrassing ways as well, but they don't feel any shame in this stuff, so maybe we can't really describe it in terms of embarrassment. He was clearly the worst of the attackers, but I really I don't know whether I was making a conscious decision not to give him oxygen and airtime, or whether it was just that he had foreshadowed his attack, and so when it finally came, I was less interested in it. And maybe that would be a good thing if that was the case. But yeah, by most accounts that I witnessed on Twitter yesterday, he just had, he continued with his pre-planned, essentially he was aiming for the audience to come away with, oh, well, I didn't realize that the judge was a child molester. That's bad. I mean, that was supposed to, that was supposed to be the insinuation from this whole thing. I don't want to bother finding the kernel of reality that fed all of this. I mean, I think you've probably all heard it by now. But apparently, in laying out his grievances over child pornography, he spent an awful lot of time being weirdly specific about, I don't know what, about the content of child pornography, or the kinds of things that would, disturb people about it, which is everything. And I saw a lot of commentary contemporaneously with his questioning about, like, wow, this is awfully detailed, and this is weird, and this is the kind of guy that, like, maybe somebody should search his computer or something. And it was like, was very odd. I was just thinking, he must be pulling like doing the ultimate asking for a friend routine here, because you can't at the end say, I was just researching this online, because that'll get you in trouble. It's just kind of weird and creepy and everything, and got everybody upset. And there's no point at this juncture. This point, I was going to say, but I had just said there's no point in trying to quantify it or qualify it, or which word am I using? And anyway, the point is he's been the worst since forever. He continues to be the worst. Yesterday, he went beyond everyone's expectations in being the worst. I guess he'll do more about that today. It's about grabbing the spotlight and playing to, I guess for him, QAnon crowds, and being the most radical, loudmouthed idiot on the committee, and therefore getting the most attention. And nothing that they do seems to alienate their Trumpy, QAnon-y supporters. So go for it. I guess that's the mistake that Mo Brooks is finding out he made today, since he didn't sign on strongly enough to the big lie, even though he came to the big lie rally and spurred people on to the insurrection attack on the Capitol. Apparently that wasn't enough for Donald Trump. Trump is unendorsing him in his latest race. So I don't know. That might be a good thing for Mo Brooks. I have no idea. At any rate, what can I tell you? I promised I would come back and say that Josh Hawley is terrible, and I have now done that. Speaking of terrible, and speaking of somebody whose name I never did learn to pronounce, Mike, is it Mike? Does he say Mike Brown, like as O, or Brown? Or does he say Braun, like Braun might be pronounced, or we might think it's being pronounced? I don't know. But at any rate, his comments yesterday, I just wanted to say this. If you haven't seen it, if you've seen the 40-second or so video of him being asked by the reporter what was a follow-up question to the original question, in which he says, so you would be okay with the Supreme Court striking down, national protection, like striking down Loving versus Virginia, and nationwide protection for rights of interracial couples to marry. And he says, yeah, I would be fine with it. Now he's sort of backpedaling, I guess, and lots of news outlets are going with the report that he's walking the statements back, and he has said, I misunderstood the question, etc. But there's really no possible way that that's a real answer. And I would refer you to a longer 3 minutes or so segment of the video, which I have in, I've saved, and it's in my Twitter feed. I don't know if I put it in Pocket or not, but from who is this? NWItimes.com, and I'm not even certain what it is I'm looking at. Let me scroll all the way up or down. What am it's one of those online newspapers, and they go by the fancy online abbreviated name, and then I realize, I don't know what newspaper this is, after all, when all is said and done. But, Braun is from Indiana, and so I don't know. Those of you from Indiana, we have a couple of listeners who probably know what NWI Times is and can explain it fully. But suffice to say, the local news folks running more of this audio, and it's essentially impossible to believe that he misunderstood the question. I wonder if we could do this. Maybe what I'll do is, let me pocket this. We might as well spend some time on it, and then we'll move on to a bunch of other things. But if I can illustrate for you, I think I know I didn't put aside the 40-second version of this, the 40 second, not the like ordinarily speaking, this was 40-second. But where can I find this? I bet if I search on Twitter here for Braun, what the hell does he pronounce that name? Then I will find most readily the 40-second clip, but let's see. And then we can play that, and that's like the most salient part, and the part that they use to kind of set up the story. Here we go. All right, let me see what we can do here for you. All right, I'll move this over to the big computer. So here's the clip from the Heartland Signal was circulating this on Twitter. And this is the very brief version of the stuff that got him in trouble, which is, let's see, does this autoplay? Do I have to hit the volume? Here we go.
With the Supreme Court leaving the question of
So
you would be okay with the Supreme Court leaving the question of interracial marriage to the states?
Yes, I think that that's something that if you're not wanting the Supreme Court to weigh in on issues like that, you're not going to be able to have your cake and eat it too. I think that's hypocritical.
What about Griswold versus Connecticut?
Well, you can list a whole host of issues. When it comes down to whatever they are, I'm going to say that they're not going to all make you happy within a given state, but that we're better off having states manifest their points of view rather than homogenizing it across the country as Roe versus Wade did.
All right, so that's the 42-second clip. And quite honestly, that's actually pretty clear in what this is all about. And it makes it extremely difficult all by itself to come to the conclusion that he was misspeaking or didn't understand the question. He expounds on the question for quite some time. And by the way, maybe I can play this again because then the screen comes up and it says the source is the Times of Northwest Indiana, which indicates to me that means that the NWI Times is the Northwest Indiana Times. So now the question is answered, and those of you from Indiana listening to the show can relax and not worry about tweeting it to me. But anyway, like I said, he's quite clear in what this is, and the whole thing about you can't have your cake and eat it too. He's saying, I understand that this will undo a lot of settled law, but if you are a believer in states' rights, in the olden days ways, like apparently I am, which you should not be, then you will come to the conclusion, you got to take the good with the bad, even though it's actually all bad. And I know I've seen a couple of people saying, are you sure you understand this? Because, that's also going to mean that states can make their own gun laws, and that the claim that the Second Amendment is absolute in its guarantee to Americans in their right to keep and bear arms means that some states can say, well, maybe it's not absolute. Maybe it doesn't exist at all, and we can get rid of it. And then you'll be unhappy. And I think he would acknowledge that, but he would also say, yeah, but that's not really going to happen because I, like the majority of the Supreme Court, am a gimmitarian, and they're simply going to rule that the stuff they like stays and the stuff that they don't like goes, which is, of course, having your cake and eating it too. And so it is very much his position that you can, in fact, have your cake and eat it too. That's what he intends to do. But the longer clip, I think, makes it impossible to, I don't know whether you can still conclude from those 42 seconds. It's very difficult to conclude that he misspoke or misunderstood the question. It's kind of bizarre, but this longer clip makes it totally impossible. And I don't know. I guess if we're going to get in trouble for the copyright, we're going to get in trouble for the copyright. Maybe we'll break it up a little bit, but we'll play you a longer clip, and you'll see how you even get to that follow-up question, because that question that gets posed there. So you would be okay with the Supreme Court striking down the right to, of interracial couples to marry, or however it gets put there. And as a matter of fact, I could probably look, because I think the tweet had the might have had the transcript with it. Why did this come up this way? All right, let me see. The second one, I think, was the one that... it was the first one that had the transcript, just so I can remember how the follow-up question was asked, right? All right, one more try here. You would be okay. So you would be okay with the Supreme Court leaving the issue of interracial marriage to the states. And by the way, I guess we might as well point out, like, poor Clarence Thomas, if you're inclined to feel that way, is sitting in the hospital with some sort of mystery infection, hearing Mike Braun, whatever, saying in the context of the hearings for the Supreme Court itself that interracial marriage is a maybe iffy proposition and maybe some states should be able to ban interracial marriage. But by the way, having your cake and eat it too is that some states can ban Mike Braun. But, I'm just saying it's a possibility. I don't know whether the court will uphold it or not. But poor Clarence Thomas himself in an interracial marriage, although I wouldn't doubt that he would say, yeah, I would say that states have the right to ban it. I just wouldn't go to those states. But, that's not a realistic view of anything. If you're going to have anything like the United States and the right to conduct business and travel to any one of the United States, you can't be having to navigate your way around states that are going to invalidate your marriage on the way through. That's just not a realistic possibility. Anyway, I guess it's probably worth pointing out at this point, though I don't know if somebody must have. I just wasn't watching closely enough to see it. But has anybody seen, Judge Brown Jackson's husband? Because anyway, she kept the lid on it, I guess, because the Braun comments happened outside of the context of the hearings. I don't know if he's even on the committee. I lose track of who's on it and who isn't, but he was just giving an interview about it. Anyway, I was going to say the longer version of the interview is here, and let me start rolling it and turn up the volume and see how long it's going to be. Oh, there's going to be a commercial first, so we can mute that part. As a matter of fact, there's quite a bit of setup to this 3-minute and 9-second segment that we could probably jump through, just so we don't waste a whole lot of time. But here's the stupid commercials going on for a long time. They're getting their money's worth at Strack and Van Til food markets. I don't know anything about them, but I guess you local Indiana folks maybe do know? Okay, let's turn up the volume here. So here they're just waiting for the connection to come through. So there's a lot of silence. I'll talk through that. Here we go.
NWI, we have Dan Ford.
The reporter identified himself.
Senator. You spoke about judicial activism. If the Supreme Court later this year strikes down the right to abortion, would you consider that to be judicial activism, legislating from the bench?
All right. More commentary to break things up. Interesting question, right? So good question. This is how this whole thing gets set up. If the Supreme Court later this year or whatever strikes down Roe v. Wade, isn't that judicial activism? And you said you're against judicial activism. And Brown, this guy, gives the correct conservative answer to that, but then launches from there into the rest of the stuff, because the basis for his answer is it's a bad decision. Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. I mean, the reality is that he believes it's a bad decision because it legalized abortion. But his legalistic answer, in order to try to escape that, is to say, or, to look like he has a real reason besides that, is, well, it's a bad decision because the real solution was to leave regulation of abortion to the states, to leave it as a state issue, and that in Indiana it can be illegal, and in New York it can be legal, and California it can be mandatory, and all the stupid jokes that they would make from then on, but that it should be left to the states. And that's when a reporter, an enterprising reporter at that point would jump in and say, well, okay, but do you think that that's applicable broadly and that all things should be left to the states? And that could be considered a trick question or a trap question, because of course you could say, no, I think some things need to be regulated one way and some things regulated another way. But it's Brown, this guy himself, who says, and by the way, I think that should apply to everything. And then later he says, well, maybe not everything, which is maybe his gimmitarian hedge on this thing. There might be some things I would be upset about, and those things we totally have to regulate. But like flag burning, for instance. But, Anyway, but listen to the length to which he goes to set this whole thing up, and then ask yourself, is it really possible that he misunderstood the question? Right. So the question was, what about would Roe v. Wade being overturned be judicial activism?
Judicial activism, when it occurred back almost 50 years ago.
All right, I've screwed this up by talking over it, but here what he says is, I consider the judicial activism to have been the original Roe v. Wade decision 50 years ago, the activism of legalizing it nationally.
So I think this would be bringing it back to a neutral point, to where that issue should have never been federalized, way out of sync, I think, with the contour of America then. And this basically puts it back to a point where, like most of these issues, where one side of the aisle wants to homogenize it federally, is not the right way to do it. This should be something where the expression of individual states are able to weigh in on these issues through their own legislation, through their own court systems. Quit trying to put the federal government in charge of not only things like we did navigating through COVID recently, where I think that was misguided, but in general. So no, I think this takes it back to a point where it should have never gotten beyond in the first place.
All right, so interesting answer, right? Do you think Roe v. Wade being reversed would be judicial activism? No, it wouldn't, because the original judicial activism was Roe v. Wade in the first place, and undoing it would bring us back to the neutral point, which is that the federal government shouldn't be involved in basically anything, and everything should be left to the states, because that's the way you build an integrated market and take advantage of the size and power and leverage the economy of the United States by dividing it up into 50 little different jurisdictions and making it illegal for people to travel from one to the other, or making it legal for states to essentially ban or otherwise punish travel into or through their states on your way to another free state that will recognize your marriage. And that's okay, and it won't cause any complications whatsoever, which is a really stupid way of looking at things. But, he's not considering all of that in his answer. Now, more.
That same basis to something like Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court case that legalized interracial marriage.
So that part is not in the 40-second clip. That is the first follow-up question from this reporter to the senator here. You said everything should be left to the states. So you would leave even things like Loving versus Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage, to the states? That's the first follow-up question. He then answers that by saying essentially yes. And then the follow-up to the follow-up is, do I understand you correctly? You said you would leave interracial marriage to the states? Yes. And then the 40-second, that's the 40-second clip that you all heard. And now he's saying, oh, I must have misunderstood the question. This is your third attempt at the question, or your third go-round and commenting at the same issue here. There's no chance in the world that you misunderstood the question or misheard the question or misspoke. This is 3 minutes of very deliberate exposition on a very specific point.
So when it comes to issues, you can't have it both ways. When you want that diversity to shine within our federal system, there are going to be rules and proceedings. They're going to be out of sync with maybe what other states would do.
Now, by the way, that was some interesting way of spinning it too. When you want diversity to shine in this country, you need to include, remember, in the panoply of diversity, there's vicious racism. Where's the diversity if you exclude the racism? It's essentially what he's asking. But he says, this is the whole laboratories of democracy thing, which, it's fine. You can have laboratories of democracy, and then when experiments go horribly wrong in some number of states, like one, the federal government can step in and say, this is so dangerous and horrible that we've learned from the laboratory of the states that the correct answer is people get to marry no matter what race. And if we leave it to the states, we're going to have, look at who we have in charge of states. You're going to have Sarah Palin in charge of Alaska. You have people like Amanda Chase and, possibly in charge. Well, now you have Glenn Youngkin instead, pretending he's not Amanda Chase, in charge of Virginia. The Wendy Rogers, the lunatic who wants to build more gallows and hang your political enemies right in the middle of Purim out in Arizona, saying this nonsense. The state legislatures are crazy. They're full of idiots. You do not want these people being able to put together a patchwork like this, or you certainly don't want to have it so that there's no check at the top where you can say, all right, laboratories of democracy have run their experiments. These horrible failures need to be gotten rid of. Like, what's the point of having a laboratory if you just throw out the results? And one experiment tells you clearly this is a horrific mistake for people to commit. Nope. Let's just let it stand, because there's no bigger laboratories out there that can tell you what the results would be if you reversed the results of this dumber, smaller laboratory. Anyway, we'll continue on we'll get eventually to the 40 seconds that you heard earlier.
It's the beauty of the system.
Oh,
and
it's so beautiful.
That's where the differences among points of view in our 50 states ought to express themselves. And I'm not saying that rule would apply in general, depending on the topic, but it should mostly be in general, because
that's an interesting way of doing it. That's his hedge there. That's the Gimmitarian hedge. I'm not saying that this should apply in general. Well, sure you are. You just said that it is, in general, the case that things should be left to the states. And then he realizes, what am I even saying, I guess? I'm not saying it should apply in general, but it should apply mostly in general, which is what in general means. But okay, fine, whatever. It's a dumb part of the answer. Well, the whole thing is dumb, but that's the dumbest part of the answer.
It's hard to have it on issues that you just are interested in when you deny it for others with a different point of view.
Like guns.
So you would be okay with the Supreme Court leaving the question of interracial marriage to the states?
And now this is the part you've heard before, and of course you know the answer to that. So what do you think about Roe v. Wade? Is reversing it judicial activism? No, because it was the original judicial activism. The real judicial activism was taking away the right of states to regulate abortion, and that's where it really belonged, and it would belong there on a lot of things. Well, do you think it belongs there on Loving versus Virginia that governs interracial marriage? Yes, of course. You got to take the good with the bad. You can't have it both ways. It should apply in general, but not always, but mostly in general. And so, yes, I would say, that's if you think it's unfortunate that would be the outcome of this doctrine when applied to interracial marriage, well, what can I tell you? I'm sorry that it disturbs you, but you take the good with the bad, and I guess he would say the subtext of this is you could work in your state to see that it be legalized. All right, so once again, just to reiterate, you are okay with leaving the question of legalizing interracial marriage to the states. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And what else? Let's see.
Yes, I think that's something that if you're not wanting the Supreme Court to weigh in on issues like that, you're not going to be able to have your cake and eat it too. I think that's hypocritical.
So that's it. There you go. Right. If you have my position and you don't want the Supreme Court to weigh in on issues that you think should be left to the states, then one of the outcomes is going to be, yes, leaving the legality of interracial marriage to the states. It's as clear as day, and like I said before, all by itself, it's impossible to say he misunderstood the question. But with the additional 2-minute wind-up to serving this second follow-up question on the subject up, and then answering it point blank, yes, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a waste of time to play this idiot's answer at full length, but the point was to give you some sense of how long he spent considering the question, how many times and from what number of angles he approached the question, and to convince you, and I hope I have in the last 20 minutes, that it is not possible to get away with pretending to have misunderstood the question or to have been answering some other question, or that there was some sort of misdirection or misspeaking. It is as clear as day, and we only got to the question because the senator brought us to that point and expounded a principle that would naturally lead. This is the kind of question you would get from the bench. If you expounded this in oral arguments, a justice would ask you, well, I mean, how far does this go? Are you crazy enough to say that it goes as far as Loving versus Virginia? And he says yes. And you say, I said Loving versus Virginia, sir. And I said yes, sir. Wow. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I hope we cleared that up for you. I know that was an awful lot of listening to a guy whose name I don't even know how to pronounce correctly, and probably could have rectified that during the 2 minutes, but instead I've spent the time looking for other fun stories to share with you, and there are several. Some of them longer than others, some of them running away from the legal issue, some of them circling back to other issues. What should we do? Well, I'll do this. I don't know. There, how's that? Quasi-legal issue, just to follow up on something we mentioned earlier in the week from the truck convoy, which I guess still exists. And I remember I told you about their concept of boxing in. They boxed in a Tesla driver. I don't know whether it mattered to them that he was driving a Tesla or not. And said they were going to effect a citizen's arrest on the guy because he brake-checked, or they claim he brake-checked, the trucks in the convoy, which I don't know, if that's, I don't know if you can get a moving violation for that or not. I guess if a cop witnesses, but they were going to do a citizen's arrest because they consider themselves all to be cops. Anyway, they've now upped the ante on the citizen's arrest thing. I mentioned that there were some reports that there was a split in the leadership about that as a tactic. And now I guess they're just going to keep pushing that button. Zach Patrizio, continuing his work for the Daily Beast, reporting on the convoy, reported yesterday afternoon that according to co-organizer, and remember, the guy who gave the big interview, who organized the thing, says, no, I'm not the only organizer, I'm the co-organizer. So that now empowers another dude to say he's co-organizer. Co-organizer and trucker Ron Coleman says that the People's Convoy has a new goal, which is great. It's nice for them to have goals. Here's the goal. The goal will be conducting those citizens' arrests, after all, except it's not just going to be of Tesla drivers or any drivers for that matter. No. As a goal goes, they have to have something bigger than that. They will conduct citizens' arrests of Metro Police Department officers in the Washington, D.C. area, the ones who are preventing them from taking off ramps from the Beltway and heading into the heart of the city and blocking traffic there. The people who are standing in their way, I guess. Plus also D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, subject to citizen's arrest by the truckers who totally know exactly what they're talking about. And I don't know what, going to jump out, and that'll be interesting. When they jump out of their, by the way, if they jump out of their trucks to conduct a citizen's arrest, someone can jump in that truck and drive it away. How about that? They should try and do that and see if that pisses anybody off. But I hope they hurry up and try it. I think they'll be in for some surprises. That's the ultimate F around and find out situation, I would guess. But that's what he says. We have to put a summons out to the Metro PD and Mayor Bowser. We would do citizens' arrests of them. The of is in brackets. And so I don't know whether he said on them, and that's incorrect. So Zach switched it to of. But It sounds pretty intriguing. Along with the reasoning for it, Coleman claims that convoy lawyers are looking into it. Why? Well, as to the arrest reasoning, truckers speaking with Coleman say that other truckers haven't been able to go to the bathroom while circling the Beltway, which has left people having actually pissed their pants, which I'm not certain. Let's see, where would I find that in the legal code? Title 18, section, the piss in your pants statute. That's right. By the way, from personal experience, if you are driving on the highway and you have to go to the bathroom, like sometimes you just can't because you're not at a bathroom, or you have to drive further to get to a bathroom, or you have to go out of your way to find a bathroom. I guess what they're saying is usually you then take an exit somewhere and go to the bathroom. But I guess their claim is because police were preventing them from exiting the Beltway and heading into Washington, D.C. to block traffic, therefore what was really being blocked was access to bathrooms. Although I'll tell you this, there are bathrooms in Hagerstown. Turn around and go back. There are bathrooms on the way to Hagerstown. Or, of course, you could say, what good old American family values. Around the kitchen table or in the family car in America, what do we say? You should have gone before we left. That's the rules of the road. Imagine that, too, right? Dad, I have to go to the bathroom. You should have gone before we left, like I told you. I have to go now. Well, don't make me turn this car around. I'll take us right back. Don't make me place you under citizen's arrest, Dad. I mean, come on. Everybody knows it's in the Constitution that I can arrest you if I can't go to the bathroom. I don't know where these guys get these ideas, but they have them. And they also think you should drink fish tanks and wear tinfoil on your head. And, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are in league to stop the pedophile vampires of the world from taking over. So, I guess there's plenty of room in there for things about citizens' arrest. Then there's one more tweet to the thread. Over the past week, there has been a growing fascination with the prospects of arresting D.C. residents, like in general. Some truckers have also suggested that they could arrest a Beltway driver if they successfully pin the driver, take them out of their car, and conduct an arrest. That is, of course, called assault and false imprisonment, if you want to go that far. But that's actually more nitpicky and stupid than anything else. But, if you pin the driver in and then pull him out of the car, you've assaulted him the minute you lay hands on him. So what can I tell you? Although I guess you've committed battery the moment you've laid your hands on them. Anyway, I don't recommend it. They shouldn't be doing this, but they're awfully dumb and awfully excited, but, drunk on their own power. All right. Too much time on that one. Skipping over to another short-ish story. I want you to file this one along with the other fascinating stories of how our technological world and connectedness, our electronic devices and the internet, etc., has changed warfare. Remember the war we were talking about? It's in Ukraine. And let's see, we had stories about allegedly Russian soldiers using Tinder or Tinder-like apps, looking for hookups in the area and giving away their positions that way. Not their sexual positions, but, where they are physically, on the map, etc. But probably that too. I mean, I guess that's what goes on Tinder. But it's irrelevant. The point is we're looking for their coordinates. Those sorts of things. The use of TaskRabbit type, short-term gig opportunity websites to get people to do spotting for artillery shelling and take a picture of a target for me, or did I hit it, and upload the picture of the damage, etc. This is a new one. A Russian soldier, we'll credit this one to Ukrainian journalist by his own declaration. Oh boy, why did I commit myself to trying to read the name? Kirilo Lukarenko. Kirilo Lukarenko. That's my best attempt at this one. And he's doing better than I am because he's a Ukrainian journalist tweeting in English, whereas I am an English reader of tweets who can't even read tweets. So at any rate, a Russian soldier called Misha, could be true, lots of them are called Misha, brought his tank to the Ukrainian military intelligence forces, I guess. All right, I'm correcting his English, but I mean, it's fantastic so far. They regularly identify phones of Russian soldiers and then text them conditions for surrender. I love it. I mean, that's really interesting. So I guess it worked on this guy. He drove his tank across a dried mud flat area. He was very smart not to drive it into the mud, I guess. Well, he was surrendering, so I guess it didn't really matter. And the picture is of him now, I guess, out of the tank, but it's only one guy, and I'm pretty sure that there's more than one person in a tank usually, unless I guess he has absconded with the tank and left his unit behind. Anyway, he's outside, and they have him lying on the ground, prone on the ground, covered with, by another soldier with a weapon, because, just making sure it's not a trick or whatever. But that's Misha, I guess, allegedly in this picture. But I love the setup of it, right? You can scan the area, and if you pick up cell phone signals, cell phones pinging, looking for a cell tower or whatever, and you're able to identify that it's using a Russian carrier, right? Then you say, all right, get the phone number on that, and we'll text that phone. Hey, Russian soldier, we found you from your phone, you idiot. Now, if you want to surrender, rather than having us blow you up based on the geolocation from your phone, you idiot, you can follow these instructions, and they probably, they're Russian Ukrainians, probably did the whole one ping only thing. And if your intention is to defect, right, one ping only. If other, I don't know what really happens if it was other. But anyway, I haven't seen the movie in a while. You know what I'm talking about. Hunt for Red October. They don't have pings. It's a tank, and anything that could make anything remote, any noise you can make with a tank is probably too dangerous to ask them to make. 1, 0 is a better option. Anyway, so that's it. They identify phones of Russian soldiers and text them conditions for surrender, which I guess, is like, if you've read the terms and conditions, check here and you can go on. He called them back and offered to surrender in exchange for, I guess, money and safety. And isn't that what we all want? And I don't know what he wanted the money for. Money, I guess he figured he really wanted safety. But then he was like, he's a good Russian, right? He's like, I got a tank here. This is very valuable. I mean, if I were, the oligarchs wouldn't pass up the chance to sell the tank. I don't see why I shouldn't privatize public goods and get a couple of Ukrainian whatevers. And what do they have in Ukraine? I know nothing about Ukraine. Anyway, the rubles are worthless. Give me something good, and I'll trade you a tank. There's another tweet to this short thread. They defined a safe place to meet. I said safe space because I'm used to that, and snowflake accusations, etc. Everybody wants a safe space if they're surrendering tanks. Anyway, they defined a safe place to meet. Turned out to be this muddy area here, and used a drone to make sure that this was not an ambush. He said that the rest of his crew, good, an answer, deserted the unit, and the morale of the Russian military is low in general. Source of the photo and info, the Facebook feed of Viktor Andrusev. So credit where credit is due. Thank you for bringing us this news. I don't know. Somebody was asking, is it possible to drive a tank solo? And I think that it is. I mean, it helps to have other people. Certainly, if you're not going to shoot anybody, yeah, you can drive it by yourself. Now, I've done it myself, although actually, true. Again, it was an armored personnel carrier. But you want to have somebody else, helping you out and spotting and running the rest of the machinery in there. But yeah, I guess you can drive it. So that's the answer to how he ended up with a tank solo. The rest of the crew took off. All right. Let's see. Other stories to share with you. Some of them are longer. Looping back to the legal issues. Some good news from Texas. I might as well report this. I had news of an earlier stage of these proceedings. Never got to it. A Reuters story from yesterday. Texas court reinstates injunction. I heard about the preliminary injunction. Texas court reinstates injunction blocking probes of transgender kids' parents. Remember that terrible story that the awful and vindictive, but playing to the QAnon crowds, governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, saying that he would empower parents, building on the success that they had in the bounty hunter version of their anti-abortion bill there, which everybody else is now passing. He said, we'll also do the same thing, and we can target the parents of transgender kids as being child abusers for facilitating their transitions. And apparently the court took that up and has said no to all of this. Here we go. Oh, I've reached my free article limit. I didn't even realize that. I didn't know that they had one in Reuters. Well, let me jump back to the pocket version and get this. Am I crediting it correctly by saying it was reported by, yes, Maria Caspani, reporting from New York on the Texas story. But here's the news. A Texas appeals court on Tuesday reinstated a temporary injunction that prohibits the state from investigating parents who provide gender-affirming care to their transgender children. The Texas Third Court of Appeals granted an emergency motion filed by lawyers with the ACLU and Lambda Legal that sought to keep in place a ruling by a lower court that temporarily blocked the investigations. The state had appealed that decision, setting up the ruling on Tuesday. Actions by the appeals court will determine whether probes of parents of trans children can or cannot take place before the case goes to trial in July. The legal battle ensued after Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, in February issued a directive ordering the state's Department of Family and Protective Services to begin investigating the parents of children who undergo sex change procedures, that's in quotes, which the governor wrote constitute child abuse under existing Texas law. Abbott's directive triggered a lawsuit on behalf of a family of a 16-year-old transgender girl targeted for investigation. The child has taken puberty-delaying medications and hormone therapy. Her mother is an employee of the DFPS and was put on paid administrative leave after asking what Abbott's directive would mean for her family. So she actually just asked the question, where are my free speech advocates? I don't know. But I guess they think there's a crime fraud exception to free speech. So they put that directive out, and she says, what's that going to mean for my family? And the answer was, it means we're going to investigate you and fire you starting now because you should have stayed quiet, you dummy. Well, that's their version of it, whereas the rest of us say it should mean that you get to adjudicate your rights before anything happens to you. And, well, the court agrees. The governor said he issued the directive based on a non-binding legal opinion that the state's attorney general, notorious criminal himself, Ken Paxton, released on February 18th, in which he said that gender-affirming medical treatments for transgender youth could constitute child abuse. The court says, not so fast. The injunction issued by District Court Judge Amy Clark Meacham on March 11th, blocking Abbott's directive, opened the door to further legal action. The state immediately filed an appeal, with Paxton declaring Meacham's injunction frozen and investigations clear to proceed. However, lawyers for the ACLU and Lambda Legal said Paxton's move constituted a violation of the injunction order and asked the appellate court to rule on the matter. And they did, and they said, what do you know, Ken Paxton, wrong again, you stupid jerk. But, no jail time for that, apparently, even though other states are working on their statutes to say that if you're a lawyer and you lose your case, you should go to jail. I'm sure they're working on that one as well. All right. Another legal issue of some interest that I thought I would share with you, and we'll leave a possible COVID story for tomorrow if we don't make it all the way through, but I thought this was an interesting piece I saw yesterday on the front page at Daily Kos, thanks to Rebecca Sager for putting this one together. Stacey Abrams, she was on Star Trek the other day, apparently, so that's exciting news. But this is about something else. Stacey Abrams turns tables on Governor Kemp down in Georgia and files suit to use a law that he signed for himself in her favor, which is interesting enough all by itself, but wait till you figure or hear what the law actually is. And you'll say, hey, that's a good point, Stacey Abrams. you're smart and are very clever and know what you're doing. That's terrific. You should be governor of this state or president of the Federation of, whatever it is. And I don't know, I forget already. What is it, a federation of? In Star Trek, the world government, and even greater than the world government. She's like the president of that. Anyway, Stacey Abrams, the real person in real life, is, according to the way Rebecca puts it here, a skilled chess player, meaning that in all likelihood she is moving at lightning speed ahead of Republican Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who she is running against this November. Her latest move is a suit filed Monday seeking court approval to use the same law that gives Kemp an enormous advantage in raising money for his reelection bid. This is a really kind of complex thing here, what's going on. The suit is asking the court to give her the right to use the law that allows leadership committees, very much like leadership PACs on the federal level, leadership committees in campaign fundraising. The law approving the use of these committees was signed by the GOP-controlled, or I guess passed by the GOP-controlled General Assembly last year, signed by Kemp, of course, and it gives Kemp, as governor, as the incumbent, the ability to raise as much money as possible throughout the campaign, even during legislative sessions. A lot of states have bans on campaign contributions during legislative sessions, which, in most states only last a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two out of the entire year. And the rest of the time, I don't know what state legislators do, but they run around calling themselves state legislators nonetheless. Anyway, you can't raise money during those sessions, and I guess Georgia's one of those. But that's not the key provision of the law here. The law establishes, legalizes these leadership committees, and you can raise unlimited amounts of money and raise year-round. And everybody remembers what leadership PACs are in the federal level. It's basically a second campaign-style account that gets opened by, most often members of Congress. And they have their own regular campaign account to which everybody can contribute, and, PACs and special interests, as they call them, individuals as well. You give your money to the campaign fund. But there's a maximum contribution on that. When you've hit that maximum, you can still give more to members with leadership PACs. And that's money that's supposed to be not directly for your own campaign per se, although you can make transfers between them, or you can, in your judgment, spend the money on your own campaign if you want to. But on the federal level, most members use it to hand out excess campaign cash to other members to help them in their campaigns. In exchange, it is often understood, for that other member's support then or later for the leadership PAC's owners bid for leadership in Congress. If you're running for whip or conference chairman or caucus chair, as we do in the Republican side, or speaker or majority leader or whatever, then, people who you helped with cash along the way might help you with their votes. Well, they have them on the state level, too. And, it costs a lot less to run for state legislative office than for federal legislative office. And so sometimes there's an awful lot of that money left. And a lot of that money finds its way into paying sometimes for the lifestyle of the candidate, sometimes for renting a plane to get across the state to somebody else's fundraiser, and sometimes, I guess, for things that impact more directly on their own campaign for office. So, who can have a leadership PAC? The law, curiously enough, says, you can have a leadership committee if you are the incumbent in office or if you are one of the major parties' nominees for that office. And, and during the general election, you can raise extra money because it has to be even. Everybody gets to, use, we're not going to put our thumb on the scale for one side or the other, except they actually do, as Abrams points out. Now, currently, Stacey Abrams is unchallenged for the Democratic gubernatorial nomination in Georgia, and she'd like to use her organization, One Georgia, and the money that it raises for her campaign. The law, Senate Bill 221, was pushed by the Republican majority, opposed by Democrats, and signed by Kemp without a single public announcement. But okay, who cares about that thing? As reported by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Abrams' lawyers argue that she should be treated as the nominee because there's no opposition, right? And there's now no need for her then to wait for the May 24th primary. Representative Nikema Williams, the chairwoman of the state Democratic Party, filed an affidavit declaring Abrams the nominee. This is similar to the situation we saw down in Florida, right? With, I can't recall exactly what the situation was, but where Democrats said, look, there's only one person in this race, and you don't have to wait for them to win their primary because the primary is obviated, right? Or in fact, that one was about a general election because they were running unopposed, and you might as well just declare them the winner rather than hold the election after all. But somehow they were withholding the swearing in for this person, saying, no, you have to get past the date on which you're not holding the election after all. Remember that? So similar situation here. But it goes really beyond that. And you really shouldn't even have to wait until you're the nominee, because one of the claims that she's making here is you have a law that says who can have one of these leadership committees. And the answer is the incumbent and the nominee. But the incumbent isn't the incumbent the whole time, right? The nominee of the opposition party doesn't happen until May 24th. So you really do have a pretty significant problem here, a constitutional problem probably, in that it's a built-in advantage for incumbency, which is exactly what you don't want. Now you are, in fact, putting your thumb on the scale. And, of course, they'll change the law later. When Stacey Abrams wins and becomes governor and as a Democrat, then they'll say, oh, yeah, the Republican legislature will suddenly realize, right, we put our thumb on the scale by saying incumbent is able to do this, when really it should have been the nominees of both parties at, right after their primaries. So really, from now on, Brian Kemp, if you're going to run to try to get your seat back, you have to wait until you are the official nominee. But Stacey Abrams, as the incumbent now, you also are going to have to wait until you are actually renominated by your party, because it's not a given that you'll be renominated by your party. In fact, Brian Kemp has a primary opponent. Yes, it's true. He has a primary opponent. It's David Perdue, the former senator from the state, now looking to take over as governor there. So why in the world would the incumbent governor be allowed to collect unlimited funds now and Stacey Abrams not be allowed, when Stacey Abrams has no opposition in her primary and is therefore the presumptive nominee, whereas Brian Kemp has only the incumbency that entitles him to this money. And he has not settled the primary issue. He's not officially defeated David Perdue. David Perdue could end up being the party's nominee for governor. Probably not. I mean, everybody probably believes that the incumbent will win. But as things stand, you have a really serious problem. This is outright just saying the incumbent is allowed to raise as much money as they want from whatever source. And nothing could be more dangerous than the incumbent governor being allowed to do that. But on top of that, nobody else being allowed to do it. Well, there's more to the story here. The Washington Post reports that Abrams called the law unconstitutional in court filings, labeling it a poorly designed, if potent, scheme for incumbency protection, benefiting Kemp. And she's right. Plaintiffs, as they say in their filings, are thus competing to raise funds with one hand tied behind their backs compared to Governor Kemp, who effectively enjoys two campaign committees, one of which can raise funds in unlimited amounts as he looks ahead to a competitive statewide election in the foremost swing state in the nation. And in all of the florid language about it, they never go and say anywhere in the filings, or at least not in the excerpted part of the filings, that, hey, by the way, he's got a primary, I don't. But it's noted here in the story, of course, Abrams and Kemp's GOP rival David Perdue formed an unlikely alliance critiquing the law, and Perdue also challenged it in court. And he's got a good point. Why should he be able to do that? And I'm just sitting out here, I'm challenging him, but that doesn't seem to have any effect. on whether or not he can raise money, but you say that that's the reason that Abrams can't raise money, and she's got no opposition. Anyway, a federal judge ruled in February that Kemp would not be allowed to use campaign contributions from a special leadership committee to win the Republican primary, so they settled that issue finally. However, he could use the money in his re-election battle against Abrams if he wins the GOP primary. As there are limits to what an individual or business can give to a candidate, having the ability to raise that cash via the leadership committee gives Kemp a huge financial leverage, an advantage, even if he can't spend that money yet. Raising it is quite enough. What a situation. And they really went out on a limb to try and put a thumb on the scale. And I'll bet you that law gets corrected all of a sudden the minute there is a Democratic governor. All right, we'll be back tomorrow for a live show, and then, of course, the pre-recorded show looking prescient for Friday. So we won't leave you alone there. Neither will Justice leave you alone after this.
NetworksRadio.com.
That guy just won't leave you alone.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning.
But in a good way.
David Waldman.
What's up next? The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Of course, Justice Putnam will take you on his tour of what he says is important about these things. Always important to get a second opinion on this stuff. Of course, we'll be looking at the hearings for Judge Brown Jackson, and as usual, casting an eye across the globe. Stay tuned.